The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we present excerpts from Thinkers of the East by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Presence. A Sufi master once announced that he was reviving the ceremony of the gifts, in which, once a year, offerings were brought to the shrine of some celebrated teacher. People of all ranks came from miles around to give their presents and to hear, if it were possible, something of the teaching of the master. The Sufi ordered the gifts to be placed in the middle of the floor of his audience hall, with all the donors in a circle around them. He then stepped into the centre of the circle. He picked up the gifts one by one. Those which had a name on them he returned to the giver. The rest, he said, are accepted. You have all come to receive a teaching, and here it is. You may now learn the difference between the lower conduct and the higher conduct. The lower conduct is what is taught to children, and it is an essential part of their preparation. It is to take pleasure in giving and receiving. But the higher conduct is to give without attaching, in words or thought, any obligation. Rise, therefore, to the second conduct, from the lesser to the greater. Whoever continues to take his refreshment from the lesser will not rise. You cannot receive payment in satisfaction on the lower level as well. That is the meaning of the teaching of restraint. Detach from lesser pleasures, such as thinking that you have done good, and realize greater attainment, that of really having done something useful. Nahas. They said to Nahas, "Your predecessor, who has just died in this village, taught us so much, and we are grateful to him. We feel that we have been honoured by his presence. But he was here for 30 years, and we fear that if we have made only a little progress in the science of man in that time, we may all be dead before you have completed your mission with us." Nahas answered, "You once hired a tiger to do your mousing. It is right to be grateful to him. But if you had had a cat, as it were, you would have not found it necessary to say what you have just said." Chances. I visited a Sufi, says Ibn Halim, and he gave a long discourse. There were many people there, for he attracted hearers from everywhere. Each discourse was a model of erudition. I said, "How do you have time to read so many books?" He said, "I have time for what I do read." Then I realized that he had no books. I said to him, "How do you obtain all this information?" He said, admitting it, "By telepathy." I said, "Why do you conceal this from your disciples?" He said, "To make them concentrate on what is said, not on who is saying it or how he acquired it." I said, "It seems that such disclosures spoil one's chances of knowledge. Then why do you tell me this?" He said, "Your chances were already spoilt before you came to me." I said, "Is there no hope for me?" He said, "Not while you try to induce Sufis to speak your jargon. If you use your jargon, you will become more and more dissatisfied, for you use the tongue of the dissatisfied." I said, "Does dissatisfaction not lead to a desire to change?" He said, "Too little dissatisfaction means no desire to change. Too much means no ability to change." Siaposh. Siaposh was asked, "Why do you not get to the heart of the matter and give us arguments and proofs with which we can test our progress?" He said, "Sugar, flour, fat, and heat are all very well separately. Combined, with time, they make delicious halwa." The Embassy from China. The Chinese emperor sent an embassy to Hakim Sanai, it is related. Sanai at first declined to send his wisdom for the edification and study of the scholars. After much discussion, however, he agreed to submit some teachings. He also sent a secret letter, heavily sealed, to the emperor. In it was the interpretation of the teachings. The teachings consisted of 12 propositions, 6 walking sticks, 3 embroidered caps, and 1 engraved stone. The emperor submitted these objects to his scholars, giving them 3 years in which to investigate them and to report their findings to him. At the appointed time, it was discovered that the scholars had written books on the subject, attacked one another, developed schisms and schools of interpretation, and used the objects for purposes ranging from decoration to veneration, from divination to instruments of corporal punishment. The emperor read the Hakim's letter. First, it described all the developments which had occurred. Then it revealed the real use of the objects and propositions. Finally, it said, "But because the information about the real meaning of these items has been delivered and not acquired, the audience is not ready for them and must, consequently, misapply them. Communication plus agreement do not equal comprehension." This letter, therefore, is the answer to the embassy's original question as to why I seemed reluctant to part with my secrets to the most learned men on earth. I was not reluctant. I was incapable. The question. A rich braggart once took a Sufi on a tour of his house. He showed him room after room filled with valuable works of art, priceless carpets, and heirlooms of every kind. At the end, he asked, "What impressed you most of all?" The Sufi answered, "The fact that the earth is strong enough to support the weight of such a massive building." Transition. It is related that Shamsi Tabrizi plunged some books into water and took them out completely dry. Jalaluddin Rumi is said to have been profoundly impressed by this feat and to have accepted the teaching of Tabrizi as a consequence. But Aqib Haidar is reported to have received this information with incredulity. How, he asked, could a man of Rumi's stature believe that what is obviously a conjuring trick might prove anything about the importance of Shamsi? Haidar preoccupied himself with this question for years. He decided to assume that Rumi would not have been deceived by a trick. He assumed further that Shamsi had indeed performed the deception. What remained to be found out was the meaning of the demonstration, for it was in this, Haidar believed, that a clue might be found to the secret language of the elect. The Hujat Ahil was the great chief of the Sufis of the age, and Haidar, when he found his way to him, asked the question which had been perplexing him for 17 years. Ahil, as soon as the question was put to him, said, "Precisely, your assumptions are correct, but man is so obtuse that he can rarely see why such things are done. Tabrizi performed the trick in order to illustrate that there was a transition from the possible to the impossible, and back again. The trick is no more than an illustration, but it is highly instructional. If, for instance, you draw a picture of a cow walking into a barn for a countryman, you will be able to illustrate to him a hypothetical fact, that a cow can walk into a barn. If the countryman were to object that this is not a cow but rather a piece of paper, this would show his stupidity, because even a piece of paper can be used to indicate the possible. Similarly, the dry books showed the possible transcending of reality which man can attain. Seeing. It is reported that Avicenna the philosopher said to a Sufi, "What would there be to be seen if there were nobody present to see it?" The Sufi answered, "What could not be seen if there were a seer present to see it?" The deputation from Syria. A Syrian deputation, composed of Jews, Christians, and Muslim dervishes, together with others whose religion was not known, travelled by the perilous route through the Iraqs to Turkestan, where they attended the Dargah, or royal court, of Ahmed Yasavi, the Sufi teacher of the age. They were met by the master at the gates of the city and made welcome with valuable gifts and every sign of honour. In their guest apartments were furs and carpets, rarities large and small, and servants were assigned to wait upon them. When the Thursday evening time for special exercises arrived, the guests were agog to be admitted to the tekia of the master of Yasi. But when the designated dervishes were called in from their work to enter the tekia, only 4 of the 82 pilgrims were allowed to go in. Their chief sheikhs were wroth, and demanded to know the reason for this favoritism, saying to Yasavi's deputy, "We were granted robes of honour by the master, fed by him and entertained royally. How now can we be excluded from the moment for which we have waited all our lives?" The deputy said, "You did not feel discrimination in your favour when you accepted the gifts. You only feel it when you believe that you are being denied something. This is the behaviour of children. The tekia is the storehouse of the riches of the other worlds. It is children who insist upon all scampering into a shop full of sweets. Mature people, on the other hand, are content when their representatives have been admitted to collect and bring back the portions for all of them." Literature. Yaqub of Somnan, explaining the function of the literature which he used, said, "Literature is the means by which things which have been taken out of the community, such as knowledge, can be returned. The similitude is as of a seed, which may be returned to the earth long after the plant from which it grew is dead, with perhaps no trace of it remaining. The learned may be millers of the grain seed, but those whom we call the wise are the cultivators of the crop. Take heed of this parable, for it contains the explanation of much irreconcilability of attitudes in the 2 classes of students." This podcast is copyright 2016, the Idries Shah Foundation.